Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Caitlin Shabazian, and I'm a student at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. I would love to introduce you to our three amazing panelists today for the Gender Disparities panel. First, we have Dr. Ranjana Kumari. Dr. Ranjana Kumari is a prominent activist and widely regarded as a leading force in the women's movement in India. Dr. Kumari is president of Women Power Connect, a coalition comprising 1,000 organizations, and director of the Center of Social Research in Delhi, a leading gender justice nonprofit. Dr. Kumari has worked extensively with the United Nations and currently is a member of the Global Advisory Board of Facebook and the Trust and Safety Council on Twitter. Next, we have Dr. Florence Condalis. Dr. Condalis manages DIME's unit on economic transformation and growth at the World Bank. She joined the World Bank as a young professional and received her Magister in Economics from the Paris School of Economics, a PhD in Economics from the University of London, and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. Her main interests are in development, labor, conflict, and agricultural economics. Also, she co-authored the World Bank's Gender Equality for Development Impact Evaluation, a cornerstone of the bank's gender equality work globally. Last but not least, please let me welcome Elaine Martin. Ms. Martin serves as a Senior Vice President for the Private Donor Group at Fidelity Charitable, an independent public charity that helps donors support more than 240,000 nonprofit organizations with over $50 billion in grants. Ms. Martin previously served as Vice President of Development at the Global Fund for Women, as well as past executive roles at Refugees International, the King's College of London, the British Medical Association, and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Harvard Medical School. She is also ranked as one of Fortune's Most Powerful Women Next Generation in 2018, 2019, and 2021, and she was named one of Save the Children's Centenary Changemakers for Children in 2019. As a quick note to our audience before we get started, you can submit Q&A via the QR code that's being posted now on the screen throughout the panel. Give you a few minutes to open that up on your phone. And we'll reserve some time at the end of our session for these questions. But I look forward to a great discussion today. And yeah, I'm going to start by turning it over with Dr. Kumari first. So Dr. Kumari, thank you so much for coming today. I would love to actually just go around to each of you, but starting with you, Dr. Kumari. And could you tell me in just a few sentences, what does gender equality mean to you? And how do you define it in your work?
Well, gender equality is a concept which enables equal treatment of all genders without any overlapping bias. And that's where, and this idea, of course, includes access to resources and responsibilities and opportunities, of course. Irrespective of gender considerations, it is important because in the absence of measures taken for gender equality, half of the population and its potential is disregarded. And that has social, cultural, economic, and of course, mental consequences.
Yeah, definitely. Great point. Great point. Dr. Condalis, do you want to add anything to that or speak more to what gender equality means to you?
Yes, so I can speak to it as an economist. I think completely agreeing with Dr. Kumari. For us, it's going to mean that men and women are going to have equal opportunities and agency over their choices. Now, what we find is, a lot of the excuses that are sort of made in the world to justify situations where men and women may not have equal opportunities often called what we call statistical discrimination. But of course, the notion that, oh, well, we just don't see so many women doing well, so we anticipate that women may not be as good at certain things. But of course, this is the product of a lot of discrimination and a lot of constrained, opportunities that men and women find differential along the career path. And so I find that my role and the role of a lot of economists in this space is to document these unequal opportunities and kind of ask the question at every step along the way, are men and women being considered equally? Are they facing different constraints? And to document these constraints, even when all else is equal. And I'll give some examples of striking findings that come from research that really outline the fact that, if we don't address these disparities in opportunities along the way, we're just going to fall short. And these excuses are just completely invalid.
I can't wait to dig into that and to hear more about those findings. Ms. Martin, is there anything you want to add in terms of gender equality in your work?
Yeah, I would just add, I think that the other piece is that people should be able to recognize and acknowledge that the rights of all are celebrated and acknowledged. So it's not just the agency, it's not just the data, but it's also saying in the experience, are we recognizing and acknowledging the rights of all equally? So that I would just add that to what was said.
Yeah, thanks for that addition. Thanks for that addition. Well, I can't wait to dive into each of your work a bit more. And Dr. Kumar, I would love to start with you. So you've led a campaign in support of the Women's Reservation Bill and wrote a book titled Reign She Will, Women's Strife for Political Space, in which you examined factors that contribute to a lack of participation for Indian women in politics. Could you explain to the audience what is the Women's Reservation Bill? And can you explain why you think gender equality is important in the political space?
Well, you asked a question very close to my heart. And also, years and years of my work is to really build women's leadership in India. And this is something which we started decades back. So it's been 29 years since this bill is waiting. But we did have, so what is Women's Reservation Bill? Actually, Women's Reservation Bill is trying to, is an attempt to give constitutional rights to women to be equally represented. So that's why this bill is to be tabled in the parliament. And also, of course, this bill also ensures that women get this opportunity for a fixed period of time, not indefinitely. So it's about 15 years, 3 terms of elections, and every 5 years the constituencies will be identified and changed. And then women have to come through the democratic route. It's not that it's not quota. It's not quota where you have 33% women you can pick and choose, but these are every political party has to ensure that they are putting women candidates only in those selected constituencies, which will then rotate after every 5 years. So finally, you would have had whole country going through choosing a woman representative, and then of course it will be left to women to see how they perform. Now, this whole struggle by the women's movement started immediately after Beijing conference, because in Beijing, I think all of you may know that United Nations conference in Beijing, it was really understood by the global community of women that women represent nowhere more than 10% in the decision-making bodies at the national level, which is senates and parliaments, and also at the state level, which is the state legislatures and representatives at the state level. And then we do have a system which is a 3-tier system in India. That would mean that we have a system which is from district council onwards. You have block council and then village. So this representation bill, women reservation bill, really was seeking to get representation at every level, at least 33% women. Now, this was passed by, in the parliament in 93, where 73rd and 74th amendment to the Constitution of India was made, and women were given right to get elected from panchayat, which is the village level council, to block level and to district level. So that really happened in 93. It was passed by the parliament. But the problem started when women started asking the real power. That is at the state level, at the national parliament level. And this bill now, which is supposed to be uh, passed in 96, is still pending. And
Wow.
this is the only bill in parliament which has never been, allowed to be discussed, except for in upper house in 2010. We have 2 houses of parliament, which is the directly elected representatives and indirectly elected representatives. So in Rajya Sabha, which is the upper house, which is kind of, you can say, indirectly elected representatives, it was passed in that. But then again, we could not get it through the lower house, which is the elected representatives. They did not agree. They didn't want to pass it. In fact, political party leaders made statements like, a very major political party leader said, I'll consume poison. They sat in the gallery of the parliament. The real, the house guards had to come and pull them out. And they said, no, we will not leave the parliament. if you want to. So there's a huge amount of resistance to getting women equality at the level of political power, and also that is why women play very little role in the governance system of India. We still have not reached, even after 70, we are celebrating 75th year of independence, and we are not more than 14% in India's parliament. So you can see that women are not getting the taxes, and we mobilized across the country. We have not left any method to do advocacy, to grassroots mobilization. We stopped the traffic to move. We have been arrested and gone to jail, at least personally myself also. But this has been a biggest stumbling block in the many success stories of women's movement in India. I can narrate all those stories, but this has been the most difficult one, where the political parties, because they are male dominated parties, basically they are instruments of patriarchy, the political parties, because majority of the members of these political parties are men, and they have very few, 7 up to 7%, 8% women members of the political party. So you can see that there is already less representation in terms of members. But I just want to very quickly, I don't know how much time I have, but very quickly move to the other side, where women have really shown a lot of political aspirations. They have come up as whole voter, as a voter, a constituency who is not organized by anybody, because normally Indian politics goes around caste lines. Political solidarity is built on caste lines. But women have voted in large numbers, and they have registered their political presence in choosing the people, representatives, and the government since you can say 2014. And before that also there was a major change that we observed was 1984. So since then, 84 to 2014, and even the recent election that we had, women are voting in large numbers, and this is because of democratization at the local level and giving women 1/3 representation already in the local bodies. And you'll be surprised that we have 1.7 million women elected representatives across the country at the local level, but not at the state and the national level.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Kumari. I definitely learned so much, and it's so great to get that perspective and hear about your amazing work. I kind of want to turn to Dr. Kondalis and talk about your work on the World Bank Report on Gender Equality, because I think it'd be interesting to sort of add perspective of what this looks like, this struggle looks like, not so much at the national level in which Dr. Kumari is working, but at the multilateral, at the international level. So if you could speak a bit to kind of what do you see as the role of multilaterals in promoting gender equality?
Sure. Thanks a lot. This was really exciting to hear Dr. Kumari's perspective on this. So, the World Bank obviously is a large multilateral in the development space. We do a lot of lending. We support this lending with technical assistance. And of course, we try to work towards the SDGs, and therefore, gender equality is one of these SDGs. So we have, a corporate responsibility to try to make our investments as gender rich as possible. And this is, I think, there's no doubt that from an advocacy perspective, we believe in gender equality as something that is fair and something that should happen. But there's also an economic aspect to it that I think is really important to bring up, that talent is wasted in the process of excluding women. We waste a lot of talent. Women have a lot to bring to the discourse, whether it's political or technical, different opinions. It's well documented that women, and I think thinking about the Panchayat study that actually someone at Harvard wrote, and using this reservation policy, showed that women, when they are elected, actually provide much more public good than men do to their panchayat, and things that actually the constituents really care about, such as water and sanitation, whereas men don't do as well. So there's really a sense in which we're leaving talent on the side of the road when we don't take this into account. And I want to give a couple of examples of what this looks like, and the role, I think, of economists, since the World Bank is full of them, in documenting what's left on the table. And so one of my colleagues, Girija Borkar, did a tremendous work in Delhi documenting the college choice that high school graduates take. She used very refined data from high school grades. So, this is a very meritocratic process where you graduate high school, and depending on your grade, you can access different selected colleges. She showed that at equal grades, men and women make different choices, and that women tend to pick colleges that are actually lower ranked than their men counterparts, even with equal high school graduation ranks. And she documents the role of unsafe transport in leading this choice, and that essentially women are not able to achieve the attendance in higher colleges because of lack of safety in transport. So this is the type of mechanism that, as a bilateral, as World Bank, we finance a lot of investment in transport. So we see our role as making sure that even when we invest in something that sounds like super boring, like brick and mortar, we're going to build a subway somewhere, we're going to build a BRT somewhere else, this infrastructure actually needs to promote gender equality. Now, it's not easy. We don't have a cookie cutter approach to making this work. In my own work in Rio de Janeiro, we show that women reserved cars in the subway, in the train, are not necessarily a panacea, for example. We show that they may engender stigma against women transiting in the non-reserved space. So now, their space is reserved and they shouldn't be in the mixed car. So it might actually play in favor of sort of the perceptions, the gender perceptions that the operating norms and kind of disfavor women in the long run. So we have to take all this into account. But I think there's a huge role, even when we talk about investing in something like a metro or an irrigation scheme, in understanding what this means for gender equality and what are the complementary interventions that should be put in place to really make this infrastructure, this large investment, as gender, equal as possible and leading to better outcomes for everyone. I will stop here.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to hear you touch on just how complex this issue, right? How you're really thinking through not just economics, but social norms and social psychology and all of these different things. I think it's really fascinating. I'm going to turn lastly to Ms. Martin, because I think you've done some really amazing work in the intersection of gender equality and investing in charitable giving that Dr. Condos talked a bit about in terms of how the World Bank does that. So my question for you is a bit of a two-part question. First, what do you see are some overarching themes in terms of funding for gender equality work? And, if you see any new thinking in this space. And then the second part of the question is, can you speak to sort of like the gendered nature of giving itself?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to both my colleagues on this panel, because I do think the context you're setting is so critical. When we think about the areas that donors are giving to when it comes to funding women and girls, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, as we think about women's leadership, is economic empowerment, women's political participation, the intersection of climate, environment, and health when it comes to women. We think about the prevention of gender-based violence. There are all these different categories, ending child marriage, even thinking about direct services and women's health, where maternal health issues are coming up, or reproductive health. And so the setting for where donors are giving funding is really a broad range that's really looking at every aspect of the mind, body, and spirit of the woman. But then when we think about what's actually moving in that space, we know that there's only 1.6% of all philanthropic funding is going to support women and girls. And particularly women-led organizations like the ones that we're hearing about are so rare. And from my time at the Global Fund for Women, I know that this idea of empowering a woman, funding a woman-led organization is a rare thing. So many times it's seed funding that they're given, but the long-term multi-year funding is missing. And so that's a really big issue for us. If we think about the second part of your question and what's really changing and what are some of the gendered nature, I work at a donor advised fund. This idea of most of the people who open the accounts are the men in the family, whether it's the father, the brother, the husband. And the people who are often doing the grant making are the women. It's the mother, the sister, the daughter. And we know that for a long time, women have been the driving force behind giving decisions in their households. And we're excited to see that growing as their economic power grows. But even this, how do we get that economic empowerment to really shift? We're seeing that they're marrying their values into their daily lives, and they're trying to do good with the money that they're distributing to the world, whether it's through consumer choices or through philanthropic dollars. And so we recently conducted a study on women and giving and found that 84% of women say that their giving is a significant part of their lives, and 86% wish they could be doing more to create positive change. So how do we create these opportunities for us to marry the work that, Dr. Kumari is doing with the opportunities for donors to actually participate in that? I think this is really a key question. One of the challenges that the study illuminated is that women are less likely to engage in charitable strategies that could enable them to give more. So we see that a lot of times 68% of the funding that Fidelity Charitable receives comes in this form of appreciated securities, stock options. And so if we look at that as a single entry point for participating in philanthropy, women have the opportunity to embrace more sophisticated giving methods, which would be great news for the causes that women care about and which they're greater supporters of, including those that benefit women and girls. Because we know that organizations like Women Moving Millions, which is an amazing coalition of about 400 women who have given at least $1 million or more into the philanthropic sector to support women and girls. But there's only 400 women in that community. How do we expand that bucket? And I guess the other thing I will say is that even though donations to support the needs of women and girls have traditionally been a smaller percentage of overall giving, we're starting to see more philanthropists actually move money into this space. So not just Women Moving Millions members, but people like Mackenzie Scott and Melinda Gates, dedicating and committing to this being a core part of their strategy and putting that out front. And when we look at equity, we're looking both at gender as well as racial equity. And I think this is a shift that is only going to benefit our community. So I think this is an exciting time to think about how do we look at the challenges that women are facing and really marry that with the opportunities to give and advance that work.
Wow, thank you so much. I feel like this was a great framework to set us up and have this conversation hearing from all of you, because I think we're touching a bit on Dr. Kumari's work, which is so much about, the importance of advocacy, Dr. Condolis with the importance of thinking from a global level and the importance of evaluation, right, and really critically measuring these issues and research. And then, of course, Ms. Martin, speaking about the importance of mobilizing capital for social good, right? You need fuel in the engine, so to speak, in order to make change. I'm going to transition a bit, really actually focusing more on measurement and evaluation, because, I think with any social cause, one of the most difficult components is this idea of measurement, right? Like, what does change actually look like? What does change actually mean? How, maybe starting with Dr. Condolis, because I know this is a big part of your work, but how do you critically measure change in gender disparities over time or in gender equality over time?
Thank you so much for this question. Economist, I'm again an economist. We've been trying to really mix a variety of measurements. So there is the bread and butter of what we use, which is, follow sort of a cohort over time. So start with, you have a problem at hand, you run a random sample of the populations of interest. If you have a randomized control trial, great, you're going to randomly sample among the different treatment and control groups, and then you're going to follow these households, these women, these men, these children over time, and see how their outcomes change from baseline to after the intervention, and so on and so forth. And I think this touches a little bit on something that was just mentioned by Elaine, which is the lack of programmatic funding to even start to document the changes over time. A lot of changes take a long time to appear. And when we're very constrained by the length of a program and when this program starts and ends, typically we're talking about at the World Bank 4 to 7 years at most. 7 years, being between the moment the loan is signed to the end of the disbursement period. So you may have 3 years of intervention in the middle. Now, when we talk about gender norms changing, for example, the attitudes toward women working, we're talking about changes that might take a long time. And so, as Dr. Kumari said, you give 15 years, you give a reservation change for 15 years, and then you see how it plays out in the long run, which is much more than 15 years, right? And so having funding that documents these changes, not just within 5 years, within 3 years, but within also 15, 20 years, having a commitment to documenting these changes and not being so impatient for results, I think is super important, because we know that these changes take time. Now, it's good to be impatient because we want to make programmatic change quickly. As soon as we see some things changing positively, we want the programs to change. So we are, for example, in the process of running a multi-country experiment with the World Food Program. So DIME works with the World Bank, but we also work with a lot of different multilaterals and bilaterals, and one of them is the World Food Program. And they're very interested in understanding the gender empowerment, the women's empowerment impact of what they call the Food for Asset program, which is essentially a public works component that they run across the globe on a very large scale. And so within this public works component, what we're doing is simply a reservation change where we sort of we say, okay, in some context, only women can take part in this public works, and in some other context, only we don't care, we don't assign, we just say men and women can take part. But we know that it's mostly men who take up the opportunity to work for a salary in most contexts. So this allows us to say something about the potential empowerment value of giving women an opportunity to work outside their homes, which doesn't happen in many contexts very often. And then what we want to do is track, of course, the impact of this intervention. So if this intervention shows us that during the time of the programmation, we have women who are more empowered to use their income to work outside the home, to therefore create new opportunities for investment, that's fantastic. But we also want to track these changes in the long run. Does that then reflect back on their own perception of what their agency over their time use should look like? Does that reflect back on their husband's perspective of what agency should look like in the household? And then maybe other norms within the community. So we are really interested in documenting changes, both at the short run, are these programs changing things when they're happening, and in the longer run, are we shifting outcomes that can then lead to a virtuous cycle of engagement, of economic engagement for these women? So this is kind of the measurement challenge a little bit, is securing enough funding and enough interest to not just do the short run, which is very powerful, because if the WFP learns that assigning more of the work to women actually has a really a huge potential for women's empowerment, that's a great outcome, and they're going to make programmatic decisions based on that. But we also want to track the impact on attitudes towards gender, towards agency, and use of time. So I'll stop here.
No, go ahead.
No, so just stopping here.
That was, a great answer. I love you talking about the mixture of looking at long-term and short-term outcomes, at looking at, more tangible outcomes, but also things like attitude, things like knowledge. I feel like those are all really important as you're thinking through impact and what that looks like. Ms. Martin, I think, maybe I'll turn next to you because, a relatively new player in the funding space, right? Impact investing allows us to mobilize capital for social good, perhaps with some amount of financial return. And so, again, speaking about this, like, how have you seen impact investing create gender equality programs? And, what does impact look like, not maybe from the programmatic perspective, but from the investing perspective? What are metrics that you think through when choosing investment opportunities?
Yeah, this is a really interesting area that we're seeing huge growth in, and it's also still a little bit of a mystery and a little experimentation, even though it's about 10 years old as a field. And so what we're noticing is that impact investing often is being driven by women. So in our first 5 years of doing impact investing, 90% of the experiments that were brought to us from our donor community were from women donors saying, we want to do something, we want to marry what we're doing um, in our private portfolio alongside what we're doing with our philanthropic portfolio. And how do we marry those two? And the first attempt was through impact investing. And so it was everything from bridge loan type models, PRIs, even things like doing a short-term bond strategy that might be a social impact bond or a pay for success model. And one of the things that I think is really powerful here is that, Dr. Kadals mentioned this idea of what the work that we're doing that's paid for, but what about all the carer work that's happening? And how do we actually start to look at some of the places that we can enter the financial space that haven't historically been supported in that way through philanthropic dollars? And so we've seen this extraordinary growth of $2 billion committed to impact investing over the last year or two alone, and through the Fidelity charitable portfolio. And so we looked at, what is it really going towards? Is it going towards environmental work? Is it going towards women-led businesses? Is it going towards healthcare that's specifically focused on maternal? We recently had a donor who did a guaranteed cash program specifically for women, mothers in New York. And what we saw was that when that funding went into the hands of women, their babies actually had a higher success rate in terms of their brain development in the first 6 months of life. And so these are really direct impacts that we're seeing right away. And it's very exciting because these are new ways for us to think about where we can move our capital to. And I would also add that this idea of what does it look like? I was involved in a program a couple of years ago, which was in partnership with Partners in Health. And so Partners in Health being a global health and development program working around the world to build a hospital in Peru where there are some of the highest rates of tuberculosis in the world. And our donors were able to commit within a 3-week period to fund that hospital and not just fund it, but actually have that money return into their accounts within 4 years, because financing was going to be provided by the government once the hospital was built. And so these are new innovations in this space that I think we have to embrace and think about, how do we build that complementarity between what you're doing with your philanthropic dollars, which you can see in some ways as like 100% risk. And then in the case of the impact investments, you can be a little more flexible because you might get a return on that investment in a different way, and not just a financial return, but of course the social good as well.
Awesome. Yeah, impact investing. I feel like we all have so much to learn. It's such an interesting space. And especially as it's stemming into newer areas, right? In which, gender equality is certainly a newer area. All right, Dr. Kumari, I think I'm just going to close out with a question for you to make sure we leave plenty of time for Q&A. So I've worked in NGOs in the past, non-governmental organizations. And I feel like for me, one of the hardest parts of working in NGO is thinking through partnership with other NGOs. I'm curious, how have you been able to, in your work as the director at the Center of Social Research, been able to strategically align with other NGOs that are working in the same kind of gender equality space? And you've been such an amazing builder of coalitions, right? Like this is, a boil the ocean type movement of it requires all of us working together and working in the same direction to make change. What is the key to your success? How have you been able to build these coalitions so effectively? I think you may be on mute, Dr. Kumar.
Sorry. Thank you, Caitlin. I think what we have been doing over the years in the women's movement in India, first of all, let me just say that I so much agree with Elaine and also Dr. Cornelis about the assessment and measurement of the change, because social change is a process and it doesn't really happen overnight. You have to plan investment and also a sustained investment for a particular period of time to be able to get the results that, for example, in the case of female feticide, the whole issue of how gender-based sex selection happens in India, and how so many girl children did not get to be, they were not allowed to be born, and then we had such a skewed sex ratio in India. I'm sure when you were traveling, you must have heard about that. But it has taken us. We started our work in Haryana in 2005, and now we have got some results where the 5 districts that we are concentrated in terms of working along with the government agencies, with the local NGOs, with community in panchayat, that the data started showing results in terms of reverse. So we do have now very good report which is coming out in this census about many districts being able to reverse it. But look, it has taken the work of decades. I mean, like, and also sustained investment. It cannot be done just like, but then difficulty with donor community, especially working from NGO, as you asked, is that, there is very short term, 1 year, 2 year, maximum 3 year grants. And, my whole life is gone in raising grants for not our own organization, but many smaller organizations. And this pandemic has really put a lot of our gains in the reverse care. For example, a lot of girls have dropped out of the school and they're not going back to school because now they've been put by their parents to do some work and earn some income. And also the ones which are of marriageable age, whether they're not legally marriageable age, but they are being pushed into marriage, so the parents don't have to. So there is increase in girl child marriage, there is increase in girls drop out from school, there is increase in also violence against women during this pandemic, because of course on the one side the social structure was not available, support systems were not available. On the other side, they could not walk into the police stations and get that kind of a support which normally they would get. So this also should be kept in mind when we are doing any kind of assessment. And also, of course, nothing can be done unless we have a good data system. Gender disaggregated data is a huge crisis in my country, and I think in the whole of the South Asia. I know that a lot of countries are struggling with that. We make a lot of policies without even understanding what is going to be, implication of it, who it is going to affect, how many percent of women are really going to be benefiting or losing out of it. So just, you throw a stone in the dark, it works, it doesn't work. So informed advocacy and informed data analysis to come to some kind of a policy is very important. Now, very quickly to answer your question, which is very important, how to build coalition. I think in form of Women Power Connect, we managed to get 1,800 organizations across the country together. India is not a country, it's a continent. You have South India with different culture. You travel, Caitlin, you would know. So similarly, Northeast, then you go to eastern part of the country. It's all very different. But one thing we are very fortunate about is that the women's rights movement has spread across the country. And a lot of organizations have come together in form of Women Power Connect. And we have built this advocacy, organization, lobbying with the parliament over the years. So how did we do that? We went to each region of the country and called major organizations which are very active. They prioritize the issues in their own region because they need not be agreeing with what nationally important that we feel sitting in the center of the country, but in their own region. So we worked on board and we said, okay, put your 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we will be taking those issues for the regional mobilization. And then we all came together to list out the issues that we would like to work with the national parliament. And we are happy that Women Reservation Bill became one of the top issue that every organization in the country working with women's rights issues wanted to put it as a first on the list. So it's important that you have to listen to the organization said their interest areas and their engagement with women in that local, regional, and then as well as national. So there are various levels that you have to, and also we should not miss on intersectionality, because this is not something which is one group of women asking for or looking up to get, but it's the women coming from scheduled caste. So caste is an issue, tribe is an issue, of course income levels are an issue, many cross-cutting issues are there which will have to be brought into any kind of analysis for intersectionality. So I would suggest that and we are working very well. Of course funding has been always an issue to run a coalition, because when you're running a network, uh, not many people believe in supporting such networks. So we've had difficulties, but somehow with the commitment of so many organizations, we have managed to push the agenda, and we have been the most recognized group of advocates for women's rights uh, with the parliament as well as in the country.
So amazing, such incredible work from all of you, really. It's been such a pleasure to learn from each of you and to hear about the amazing things that you're doing in the space. Before I turn to Q&A, I just wanted to open the floor if there's anything that the speakers want to say, just as the last few comments. And then after that, I'll turn to the audience and repost the Q&R code that allows you to answer the Q&A, and we'll get some questions from our audience. But yeah, starting with Dr. Condolis, is there any last remarks you want to make or anything you want to say to close out?
No, I think I just wanted to echo everyone's messages on the panel, but particularly I think, Elaine mentioned, really making the returns to what happens, the caregiving that happens inside the home sort of visible. And this is exactly sort of, the logic behind some of the work we're trying to do, is that we know women do a lot of work, but that work is not always valued at its true value by others in the household, in the community, because it's sort of invisible. It doesn't come with a salary attached to it, so it's kind of ignored, and that sort of diminishes the agency of these women in those contexts. And this is not just true in developing countries. Obviously, it's true across the board. And so this is something that's very exciting. I think being able to document the returns to this work, make it explicit, and also in the long run, kind of think about these returns as something that will crowd in more investment in this type of activities from others in the household that may not have contributed as equally in the past. And so I think this is very exciting, and would love to continue that conversation.
Excellent, thanks. Ms. Martin, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, the thing I've been thinking about is that the last 2 years with the pandemic, things have changed so much. And the way in which we're funding not just the carers or the unseen work, but also, what Dr. Kumari was talking about in terms of the increase in gender-based violence, we've seen a huge increase in direct service funding. And in some ways it's good because we know that women are disproportionately affected, and some of the areas that we've seen increased funding going to is hunger, alleviation of homelessness, healthcare. These are areas that are growing in need, but also we're seeing women benefiting from the funding that's going there. And I guess there's just a question for me as to how do we separate, or how do we delineate how we're prioritizing our funding? Is it to causes like direct service causes that are always going to be there, and there's always going to be a need, and which are heightened in times of crisis like we're in right now? Or are we able to actually pull out some of these bigger challenges, which we know are only issues faced by women when it comes to things like gender-based violence or women's political participation or equal pay or any of these areas? And I want to really challenge us to think not just about what are those direct services issues that are impacting women, but really are the ones that we can reinforce and strengthen the work of leadership like Dr. Kumari and Dr. Condolis around elevating the voices and experiences of women specifically, as well as in the context of what we're living through. So,
just to put my thought there, I think it's very important to really identify the gaps, which was one of your questions, Kathleen, about what are the gaps in the gender equality and how we can solve it. I think we need to identify those areas at this stage. We cannot ignore the possibility of really looking at equal representation. I mean, women should be everywhere, whether it is boardrooms, whether it is parliament, whether it is local bodies. I think this is really one of the top priority, and that will set, of course, the next gap, which is about access to economic resources. Unless women are able to, and of course, the final one would be education. Because once they are educated, the employability will increase, and they will, of course, be in employment and will have better access to economic resources. At the same time, of course, once they are in leadership position, there is a direct link between how leadership position will help women promote gender equality agenda at every level, whether it is violence against women. It's interesting that in Panchayati Raj, women, a lot of studies have said that once women got elected and they have become leaders, there is less violence in those areas. So there is a one-on-one relationship between women's leadership and reduced violence on them. So there are there. And finally, I just want to put one thought in all your mind: is peace is one of the major thing which is at the moment kind of especially looking at what's happening in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. I couldn't stop myself but saying that women have to play a very, very important role in not only just this particular situation has to change, it has to stop, the war has to stop, and we have to promote peace agenda at every level. At every level. We cannot be just talking about ourselves. Look at what's happening there. So many women and children are being unnecessarily losing life and getting into all kinds of physical disability because of the war. So I think we need to really look at peace also as one of the center issue, as a gap issue, because women are not, their voices are not heard.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up. It's true; it's such a timely thing to think about. I know we only have a few minutes left. I want to make sure we leave some time for Q&A. So why don't we just take a little 5-second pause, and if we could put the QR code back on the screen for those who weren't able to capture it earlier, you can just scan this QR code with your cellular device, and you should be able to log on to kind of our Q&A platform and be able to ask some questions. While we give people a few moments to do that, I see that we've already had some questions come through while we were speaking. So I'm going to start to go through some of those. As a first question, this is from Anonymous. And anyone feel free to jump in and grab this question if you want to answer. Can you speak to how to engage men as allies in this work? I think it's a great question. Anyone want to jump in?
Okay, so no, let me take that question. I think men are already allies in many of the work that women's movement organizations are doing. We are already partnering in many things. It is men and boys who have to change. If you look at the violence, if you look at the sexual assault, if you look at all kinds of issues, where is the problem? The problem is that men and boys are not respecting the dignity of women. They're not really, they're transgressing the sexual boundaries of women. They're just not. So I think they are the major allies. Societies cannot be run without support of both genders, all genders, in fact. So we do need to have to develop partnership with men and boys, and it is they who have to walk. We have miles to go, but they have to kind of catch up with us.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would also say the power of the purse is another area. We can if we know that only 1.6% of philanthropic funding is going to support women and girls organizations, we know that there are men out there who could be adding to that. We need to raise that percentage significantly, and it can't just be women funding women. It has to be men and women together partnering to lift these issues to fore and actually really put the dollars behind it.
No, I agree with all this. And I think, as an economist, obviously, we have in economics a lot of gender disparities in outcome, in access, in all sorts of things. But we also notice that women economists are more likely to work on gender issues than men economists. Now it's it's an issue that we're trying to address. I think knowing some of my colleagues who are extremely achieved women economists who are the leaders of some important journals of economics. In economics, they're trying to really promote publishing these gender studies in very good journals, in very good outlet to create really a market, more of a market for this type of work. And I think it's working. It's early stages, but I think there is a movement towards just creating this evidence and rewarding this evidence. And I think that's important to then isolate these gaps, have top economists, top social scientists in general working on these issues and providing the evidence we need to take action. So I think it's moving in the right direction, but we're not there yet. And we need men to help because a lot of them are in leadership of these journals and these publications.
Yeah.
Definitely true. Definitely true. I think maybe I'll ask one or two more questions. Here's a great question. Anyone is welcome to start. Can you think of any strong examples of countries that have been able to reduce gender disparities in a relatively short amount of time? I'm wondering if this change has to be inevitably slow and take generations.
You want me to talk about India?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Okay, so I think not many, I can't say that India has really closed the gender gap, but when you look at many issues, for example, number of girl students who have gone to school really has multiplied over the years, especially with uh, right to education for all children as a constitutional guarantee. And wow, what happened? Can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a great answer.
And see me also?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Something happened with my laptop. So anyway, so this is something, but then I can identify areas like, you know, women's access to economic, for example, banking. We have already a large number of women, over 30 million women, who have opened the bank accounts, and they are now operating the bill. Women are operating the banks and the bank account. Similarly, we have, so there are areas where women have made progress, and that has not happened because just there has been pressure from the women's movement side, demand, mobilization, but at the same time there has been response from the government, and those together have changed the scene for a lot of women who've made progress. So it has to be all stakeholders who have to work together if we want the change to happen. Country wise, of course, one of you can talk about it.
I'm happy to give the example of Rwanda. Obviously, everyone, I imagine, on this panel is familiar with the case of Rwanda. And I have, my grandmother is Rwandan, so it's close to my heart, but I also do a lot of work there. And, obviously there's, the terrifying events of 1994, which left the country sort of in a really bad, very bad shape, but then sort of a renewal, right? Through women taking leadership. And now we see sort of, a lot of women in high level positions in the country. Now, what's interesting, I think, about that picture is that you have sort of the Kigali center of government and economic center of the country that's extremely gender equal. And I see in my daily conversations with the governments and high level women there that things are going pretty well, and there hasn't been sort of a decrease in gender equality since the return to peace and the transition. But having said that, when you go to the rural areas, you see a different picture where women still are lagging behind, when there's still a lot of violence against women in the households, and women may not have equal share of the resources. And I do work with the World Food Program in those areas on this public works component, and you see a gender gap, important gender gaps there. So I want to say, even if we fix a problem at one level, it doesn't mean it's fixed at all levels of society. And so I think that's an interesting sort of contrast there for that country, and something to learn from.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just going to say my family comes from Sri Lanka, which was, of course, the first country to have a female head of state. And yet, and we have a very high literacy rate, 90, 99, 98% literacy rate. So this combination of the power of education and the power of women's leadership at a political space, there's the benefits of that. But if it's not coming through, and we suffered through a long war, there's the combination of where the intersection of social norms and policy and practice all come together, and I think there's still struggles there. So I think this is where the power of the intersectionality that we've been talking about really comes forward, and that it's not going to be one silver bullet. It's going to have to be really everyone working in concert. And I think we all have a lot of work to do, all of our countries, to get there.
Yeah, these were some wonderful examples, and I absolutely agree that it is a combination of so many different factors that need to be working forward in the same direction, talking about meeting policy change and social norms. You can't just have one or the other. I think I'm going to close this out today. This has been really wonderful to have all of you coming to speak with us at Harvard. I really appreciate it. It was really wonderful to get to know each of you a bit better, and it was really wonderful to hear your perspective. And I want to say a huge thank you to our production team and to our audience for attending. I hope you enjoyed the session. I hope you're able to attend further sessions today. All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lovely meeting all of you.